After our last class, some students pointed out to me that I really had not been as clear as I might be about George Kelly's CPC model. So I thought I would just take a moment to take you through those steps to be sure that I was clear. In fact, it was pointed out to me that I probably gave two different definitions of the model, which makes it fairly difficult for people to follow. You'll remember that George Kelly was known, for his construct theory. And for him, constructs were simply ways in which, one kind of categorized information so that you could anticipate the future. In other words, his idea was that people have many constructs. Some are much more important than others. But the significant thing is that they help to prepare you. They give you ways to think about how you're going to handle events that occur. And since they're really kind of mental representations, constructs are very difficult to research. And in fact, you'll notice in Kelly, he doesn't actually research constructs, but he researches various aspects of his theory. One of those aspects is this CPC theory. Now, you'll see that the CPC theory had three parts. It had circumspection, preemption, and choice. Now, circumspection refers to trying out, first of all, it refers to developing alternative behaviors and how you might respond to something and actually trying them out. So in the very first phase, there are a number of alternatives one might be thinking about. One might even try some of them out. So this is the point then, the earliest point in which you're trying to figure out what's the best way to do it. Now, in the next part of this, the preemption phase, and this is where I think it got more complicated. The person has narrowed the alternatives and has made a decision to go with one plan right now, but, and this is the key thing, the person is still considering other possible plans. In other words, the person favors one way given all of the things that she can think about, but she's not really arrived at a point where she thinks this is necessarily the best. She's trying it out, but she's also reflecting, are there other ways I might do this? Then, choice comes, the third part of this model, when the person decides this is the best way to do it. So from now on, when I do this, this is really how I'm going to do things. Now, if you want to take an example of this, imagine that you have become the business manager of a clinic. It's a big clinic. And you're hiring a lot of people, and you want to create an esprit, and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to get the staff together to communicate information. And so here's what you're thinking about. You're thinking, well, maybe we should have a meeting every week. Or maybe we should have a meeting every 2 weeks. And maybe the meeting should be an hour long, or maybe it should be an hour and a half long. And maybe we should have an agenda, or perhaps we shouldn't have an agenda. It ought to be a freewheeling meeting where we just let people bring up whatever are the issues that are coming up right now. So the person is now in our first phase. That is, they're thinking about how to organize, how to have these meetings, and there are lots of alternatives before them. So let's say that our person decides what I'm going to do is have meetings every week for an hour. And so she tells the staff, we're going to meet on such and such a day from such and such a time. And she decides to have an agenda. So she's made those decisions, and in her own thinking, it's probably what I want to do. So she now moves into the second phase. She actually is having the meetings, but she hasn't committed herself to that way of doing it yet. Now, in phase one, by the way, she might have had a couple of meetings. I mean, she might have sat down and had a meeting that ran for an hour and a half and didn't have an agenda, and she might have had a meeting that had an agenda. She might have tried out a few things. But here in the second phase, she's made a decision. My best experience tells me probably I want to do it this way. I'm not convinced. So I'm still open-minded about how to do this. So now in the second phase of this, she is actually having meetings. And what she's finding out is that although she has an agenda, nobody follows the agenda. Because what happens is people come into the meeting, and actually they have things they want to talk about. And those things overwhelm the agenda, so that while she's having a meeting for an hour and she has an agenda, actually the meeting tends to run longer than that. And then some people have to leave before the meeting is over. And on top of that, they typically don't follow the agenda. So in her reflection, she realizes, actually, our meetings really are an hour and a half, and they don't have an agenda. I mean, that's what I have now discovered. So she then declares to people, from now on, our meetings will be an hour and a half, and we will not have an agenda. We will deal with the issues that you wish to bring up at this meeting. That's the choice phase. The preemption phase was when she was having the meetings for an hour with an agenda, because she thought that was the best way to do it, and she had narrowed down her choices to that. But during that preemption phase, she was still allowing herself the openness to recognize this may not be the best way to do it. Once she saw what the behavior of the people she works with is really like, and once she recognized what seems to be the most effective way to do things, then she makes a choice. And that's what Kelly means in this system. And what happens in the choice phase is that means that that's characteristically how a person is going to operate in the future in this kind of circumstance. In this particular example we're using, this person is going to hold these kind of meetings the way I described. And I hope that is clearer than it may have been before. But I want to be sure that you've kind of got that sequence. Is that clear now? Is that? Okay, well then it's time to move on to, or back I should say, to Julian Roeder. And this just takes a second, but finally. Okay. Now we're going to return to Julian Roeder, and if you remember, his main thesis was that a person's experiences, coupled with the interpersonal interactions that they have in their life, continuously influence each other. So, he did believe that your past influences you. That is, that the experiences you've had are important in determining how your personality will develop and the kinds of choices you will make. But remember, this is a very optimistic theory, and he is saying, depending on what occurs between you and various other people you meet, you can change. And in fact, his thesis was, you probably are changing because the more experiences you have, probably the more you recognize there are some things that you were doing that really aren't as effective as new ones you might develop, because you realize that by changing, you will actually be a more effective person than you were before. Then we talked about different behaviors are functionally related. And the example that I was using was a person who goes to seek a job. And she calls and makes an appointment. So that's one behavior. Then she sends a resume, quite a separate behavior. Then she calls a friend and asks, who knows the person that's going to interview her, and asks the friend to call and to put in a plug for her. And then she contacts yet another friend whom she asks to write a letter of recommendation. So we end up then with several different behaviors, quite apart from each other. But they're all functionally related in the sense that these behaviors take on much more meaning when you realize the reason she is doing this is to try to get this job. And she is trying to relate all of these behaviors towards one goal. So that was one thing that Roeder posited, that people had not quite put it into that form before. Then Roeder also said that reinforcements can be functionally related. So he said that behaviors, different behaviors can be functionally related, and he also said that reinforcements can be functionally related. And you may recall I was pointing out that let's say the woman gets this job, and she goes to the job, and she finds that that she's very good at it. So she's picked the right job, and she's really enjoying her job. And so she's getting a lot of reinforcement for her choice. But on top of that, she finds that she is developing a lot of relationships on the job. And let's even posit that this is someone who perhaps didn't have a lot of friendships. And she finds these are really nice people on the job, and she relates very effectively to these people. So now, not only does she have a job that she's good at, and that she gets rewards from in terms of the job itself, but quite independent of that, she has now formed all kinds of social relationships which are rewarding to her and which have become very important as part of this job. So the job has functionally related reinforcements that might not have been anticipated as part of the original goal she had, which was simply to get a job that she would like. Now, what's interesting about these kind of functionally related reinforcements is sometimes it is the reinforcements that one did not think about that actually become the more powerful ones. So that, let's say later on, as this woman realizes that she's really very good at what she does, and she begins to think about seeking another job, it's quite possible she will hesitate to seek another job, even though she's quite qualified. She could go on to the next step. She may even have people maybe even pursuing her, because to leave this office setting might mean giving up the kind of daily contact with all these new friends that she really likes. So the anticipated reinforcement, which is, I will get a job that I like, now is changed to the more powerful reinforcer is, I have a job in which I have a lot of friends. And it's these friends that I really enjoy being with. And so leaving would not be difficult in the sense I would give up the reinforcer that I'm leaving a job I do well because I feel pretty confident I'll do well in the next job. But I would have to give up these friends. And no one kind of talked in that language before. Now then, Roeder talked, or I should actually, people group Roeder's contributions differently. So I took Dr. Allen's grouping because that's what's in your textbook. And you'll recall that there were 5 things that Dr. Allen emphasized. One was reinforcement, and then there was reinforcement value, and then there was psychological expectation, psychological situation. Then there was expectancy, and then there was general expectancy. Now, reinforcement, as you know, simply refers to anything that has an influence on either the occurrence, the direction, or the kind of behavior in which one engages. This is a theory you've heard with several others. I mean, reinforcement's a very common term in psychology. The thing you do want to keep in mind, though, is that positive reinforcement is a far more powerful kind of reinforcement than negative reinforcement. It's when you feel rewarded that you are much more likely to repeat behavior. Now, then the next thing that we find in Roeder is he talks about this reinforcement value, which is the degree of preference for any reinforcement to occur if the probabilities of many different reinforcements are all equal. So that if you look at it from the outside, a lot of these reinforcers look equal. Yet, he's saying that there is a reinforcement value that will make one more likely to occur. And he says that happens not because the reinforcements are all that qualitatively different, but rather because you place a more powerful value on one reinforcer than you place on another. And if you recall, I had used the example that supposing you want to go to a play, and you've made that decision, and actually you're excited about going to this play, until someone points out to you, there's actually another play in town. And you realize, that's even more exciting, that's more interesting. So, given that you now have 2 choices, and given that there's not much question you want to go to a play, but actually your own values tell you you want to go to the second one, you just missed being aware of the fact that it was available. Now, this becomes more complex, if you recall, when I pointed out that supposing you go with a friend, and your friend actually wanted to go to the first play, but your friend doesn't tell you that. Your friend happily goes off to the second play with you. And the reason for why the friend doesn't bring that up is because the friend is much more interested in being with you. The friend's interested in going to a play, but that's not paramount. What's more striking to the friend is that person would like to spend time with you. So they don't make a deal out of, let's consider the first play, because the friend feels fine. If you would really like to see the second play, I'm interested in seeing a play, and that's not really why I'm going anyway. My big interest is having an evening with you. And so, you have the same situation with 2 people, but the nature of the reinforcers are really quite different. And the reinforcers are determined by the internal values of the person. Now then Roeder talked about a concept that he called psychological situation. And simply put, we're talking about the situation as it is defined from the perspective of the person. It's the way someone sees a situation. It's not the way the situation really is. And this, was a central theme for Roeder, and actually it did represent him beginning to move away from some other learning theorists. Because what Roeder is positing here is that the inner life of a person greatly influences the choices that they make. And here is where Roeder really does allow for the possibilities that your history really is influencing these choices. Many of the learning theorists didn't want to look too much at history. Even I said early when we talked about Roeder history wasn't real big for him, but it was bigger for him than for many of the other theorists because he really brought it in concepts like the psychological situation. And only what Roeder would say, in order to be kind of consistent, is he would say, it's both your past experiences and the current situation that causes you to make decisions in the here and now. And if you remember, the example I was using about this had to do with, a woman who disagrees with a friend. And ordinarily, this is a person who would express her opinion. So ordinarily, she would say, I don't agree with you. But she knows from past experiences that her friend doesn't handle criticism very well at all. So instead of criticizing her friend and saying, I don't agree with you, she doesn't say anything. Now, if we were only looking at this woman, who we know is bright, articulate, always expresses herself, our prediction would be that since she doesn't agree, she will make it known she doesn't agree. But because there is another experience going on inside her, namely, I really value my friend, she behaves in a way that's really not at all characteristic of her. That is, she doesn't object to the friend's opinion because she would rather keep the relationship going, and that becomes the overriding thing for her. Now then, we talked about the concept of expectancy with Roeder. And he defines expectancy as a cognition or belief about the property of some other object or event. And such expectancies can range all the way from absolute certitude inside yourself. You are 100% convinced something is going to happen, all the way to you are utterly convinced this will not happen. So you can either feel like it's a sure thing, it's going to happen, all the way to feeling, it's a sure thing that this will never happen. Now, importantly, and this is why we often talk about this as learning theory, what Roeder says is that expectancies can change. The fact that you make a judgment at one time doesn't mean that your experiences won't help you to reassess. And these experiences can occur because we have misjudged an event. You might try out for a team. At the very first practice, the coach says something to you that you regard as hostile. I mean, the coach makes a comment about your style or about something you're doing. You experience it as a real put down. So you start off with your expectancy is, this is a hostile coach. This is going to be difficult for me to play under this person. However, because this sport is important to you, you continue to go to practice. Or let's say maybe you have a scholarship, so you feel you have to go. But you find out in subsequent practices that actually this coach is not a hostile coach. In fact, most of the time, the coach is praising your behavior. Most of the time, the coach is actually telling you you're doing a good job. And in fact, you're really getting to like this coach. So your first expectancy was, hostile guy, I don't like him, I'm stuck with him, this will not be fun. But because you're open enough to recognize that you made a misperception the first time, and actually the ordinary characteristic of this coach is not to be critical, but actually to be very helpful, to be very responsive, to be very rewarding, that now you've gone all the way from lots of feelings that things will not go well, or at least that you won't be happy, all the way to feeling, I am glad that this person is the coach. And that's the kind of thing that Roeder wanted to get across to people. That is that you want to appreciate that expectancy is a very complicated issue. And so he actually said, there are three elements to expectancy that you should be aware of. One of them is very mundane. The first one is really, very simple cognitions, like, labeling something, like this is a team, or this is a bus, or this is a class. But the reason why he used the concept was it does help you to create some sense of, like, what are you talking about? You have some cognitive way to organize the concept that you're about to look at. So the first thing you do is name it. Then he says there are expectancies for behavior reinforcement. For example, I prepare a sumptuous dinner for my friend and put a lot of energy into it. And I do it, let's say, because, first of all, I want to impress my friend. I want this person to think well of me. Also, I know my friend doesn't think that I cook. So they will be very surprised that I have cooked. They'll be even more surprised that this is a rather interesting meal. And so the person comes, and the person is delighted. And the person feels and expresses this. Now, all these behaviors I've just described were really aimed towards me getting the reinforcement that my friend is delighted. That is, I want my friend to like this meal, to like the evening, because my real goal is I want this person to like me. And here, the behavior one engages in is not because, let's say, in many cases, of course, people love to cook meals. But let's say, that's not especially important. Let's say that I really cooked the meal in order to get the reward of having my friend be delighted. That's where expectancies occur. And so the behavior between what I do and the reward may be fairly complex. That is, I may go through a lot of steps in order to make an event occur and in order to have the reinforcement occur. That's very different than, like we talked about, say, with Skinner, where you look stimulus, response. This happens, this happens. What Roeder is saying, oh no, in order to get response, you may really do a whole lot of things. Both cognitively, you may think about things. Behaviorally, you may do things. You may also be planning. And there may be a significant amount of time between when you decide you really want this person to respond very well to you and when they respond, because you're going to engage in some kind of complex behavior. Then he said there are expectancies for reinforcement sequences. And you may recall right at the end of our last lecture, I was using this example of the person who, like, the person buys a business. And why does he buy a business? Well, he does so because he wants social recognition that he owns a business. He also wants to become wealthy. He wants to be independent. And he wants to enjoy what he does, and he thinks, I would really like to run this business. So in this example, you get reinforcements that are multiple. You get reinforcements that may come in a sequence. You get reinforcements that may be longer than others. And you get reinforcements that may have very different values. Like in this person's case, perhaps being seen as a business owner and gaining social acceptance may be more important to this person than the money that the individual makes. And what is key in here is that what Roeder was saying is things can really be very complex. Now, he had one other item then, and that was this concept of generalized expectancy. And he posited that experiences can vary in terms of their generality. And he said, we have certain expectancies that can generalize to a wide variety of behaviors. And we also have things that will only generalize to a very specific or limited number of behaviors. For example, let's say that you go on dates, and we'll take two people. For one person, when they go on dates go well. And they kind of know that about themselves. They feel, I'm a very effective person in relating to other people. I've been very pleased with the dates I've been having. Let's say I'm not serious at this stage, so one's trying to go out with a number of people, but one feels choices are good and this works well. Now, so in other words, what generalizes here is that probably all dates will go well. Now let's take our second person. Our second person has some dates. Some go well, some don't. And the person begins to recognize that the dates that go well are with people who did not attend college. And the dates that don't seem to go well are with people who do attend college. So now, unlike our first person, whose general sense is, when I go on dates, they'll go well, we've got somebody who has a recognition that if I want to enjoy dates, I probably should ask somebody out who doesn't go to college or who hasn't gone to college. And if I ask somebody out who hasn't gone to college, I'll probably have a good time. If I ask someone out who's gone to college, somehow I don't handle that well, or somehow the other person doesn't seem to get interested in me. But you got a very different kind of generalization. Now, okay, that brings us then to where we were at the end of our last class, which was that there are two less important concepts that need to be understood within this frame of social learning theory. And one is called freedom of movement, and one is called minimal goal. Freedom of movement is defined as the mean expectancy. So it's kind of like the average expectancy of obtaining positive satisfactions as a result of a set of related behaviors that are directed toward obtaining a group of functionally related reinforcements. Now, an example here might be, some people are quite confident in their jobs, and they believe they would be really desired by almost any company. So these people have a lot of freedom of movement because first of all, they're enjoying their current job, but also they feel, I'm a very effective person, and I would do just as well somewhere else. Other people do not feel so secure. And they may worry, they may like their current job, but they may worry, this is the only job that I think I will really be effective in, that I'll really be accepted at, that I can really do well. So we would say that with our first person, that person has high freedom of movement. Our second person has quite low freedom of movement. Now notice in this, if we posit that both people are enjoying their jobs, freedom of movement doesn't become very important. It's just that our first person, somewhere inside himself or herself, knows if things don't go well, I can always go on to something else. I'm very effective at what I do. In the case of the second person, if he or she is enjoying their job, then freedom of movement really isn't a big deal because they like what they're doing. Freedom of movement becomes a terribly important concept if this person stops liking their job, because then they feel they are trapped in it. They don't feel they have flexibility, and they haven't figured out a way to change that. Then Roeder talked about this concept, minimal goal. And minimal goal is the lowest goal in a continuum of potential reinforcements for some life situations which will be perceived as a satisfaction. Okay? Now, you can look at this concept in which positive reinforcers might cease and negative reinforcers begin. In fact, that really is what this concept is about. It's at that point. What is the point at which you go from something being positively reinforced to things being negatively reinforced? Let's say you're looking for a job. And let's say the job that you're looking for pays between $10 and $20 an hour. That's kind of the general amount someone's willing to pay. But, you've decided that I have to have a job that pays $15 an hour. If I can't make that much, then I'm going to have a lot of difficulty. So $15 an hour then becomes the minimal goal. That is, that's the amount of money you have to make in this job that you're seeking in order for you to feel you've achieved what you want. However, you get the job you want, but they're not willing to pay you $15 an hour. In fact, they're only willing to pay you $12 an hour. But you take the job because you really need it. Now, what happens then is that you take the job, but since the minimal goal is not met, that is, you're not making $15 an hour, you don't like it. If they paid you $15 an hour, you would feel fine. So you notice the situation we're talking about has nothing to do with the job. Actually, you would like this job if you were paid $15 an hour. So it's not that the job is not likable, but because you're paid only $12 an hour, you dislike the job. And what Roeder was trying to get people to understand is it has nothing to do with the job. It has everything to do with what you have set as a certain minimal goal for yourself, and that is you need a job that pays $15 an hour. Now, with this job that pays $12 an hour, you're very unhappy. And Roeder then went on to point out that this concept really has a lot of meaning for psychopathology. He noted that if people set unrealistic minimal goals, then they may be chronically in a state of unhappiness or disillusionment because they never achieve at that minimal level. So, if you take an example like if one is training to be an account executive at a bank, and I see that as my minimal goal, that's what I want to be, and I get the job. Well, I can be very happy. Actually, I'm a good account executive. I have the job I want. I'm doing it well. On the other hand, if I took that job, but actually I want to be the district manager for this bank or this system of banks. And so I'm doing my account executive job, doing it well, but nobody sees me as really a candidate to be the district manager. And I don't get it. And so after a while, I become very discontented with the job I have, even though the job I have is what I'm trained to do, and the job I have, people like me, and I get rewards. But because I've set this goal that's unrealistic, like I don't have management skills, and I don't get that other job, I become unhappy. And Roeder thought that there were a lot of people who got into this dilemma, that because they don't know themselves well enough, and they don't understand their skills well enough, and they don't understand even their personality well enough, they live kind of a chronically unhappy life because they are forever seeking goals that are really not going to happen for them. And what's key in this, of course, as you can see, is a person's perception. If the person only had the insight that actually I'm quite good at being an account executive. In fact, I can be the best account executive perhaps in the bank. And people will really like me for it. And I can be productive. And I will be known as someone who really does this well. If someone can understand that about themselves, then they can have a nice life. If, on the other hand, they've set this minimal goal, namely, I must be the district manager, then they might experience a lot of anxiety. A person might become very depressed. A person feels like a failure. I mean, all kinds of things change simply because of where one is at in this idea of minimal goal. Now, Roeder's theory of personality is really highly focused on interpersonal experience, as you can tell. And Roeder accepts the position of many other theorists that parents play a very major role in the early life of the child and in setting goals for that person. And he posits that stimulus generalization occurs in the child's life, and this allows for other people to replace parents and be capable of generating significant reinforcements. So, he says it's the parents or parent figures, whoever's around there when you're young, that become the early reinforcers. But you are capable of kind of generalizing to other people. So as you grow up, other people take on that role of being the reinforcer. What's important about thinking about this, because you may say to yourself, well, this is self-evident. But what you want to be aware of is, parents are powerful reinforcers. I mean, when a parent says to you, you're wonderful, let me hug you, I love you, you're wonderfully, it's wonderful that we have you. For a little child, this is a marvelous experience. Marvelous for an adult, by the way, too. But when you're hearing this, as a kid, you're feeling very good. And what Roeder is saying is that, as you get older, you do need those kind of powerful reinforcers. It isn't that you outgrow your parents. It's much more that other people take on those very important roles of reinforcing what you do. Now, he also then emphasized that language acquisition plays a central role in the child's development. And that's just because, words serve so many purposes in our culture. They serve, first of all, as cues and directing behavior. Words can tell you what to do. They give us a means to express complex concepts. And they give us the opportunity to communicate both about acceptable and unacceptable behavior, a very powerful thing that parents do. And also, they allow others to positively and negatively reinforce our behavior. Thus, words, and what Roeder would say is words and the social interactions that they imply are key experiences in the development of our personality. And again, one also observes that he is seeing cognitive reinforcers as the keys to personality development rather than physiological drive reduction. And this is the change, in the cognitive theorists. They're now saying it's not just like getting over hunger or getting certain need satisfaction. They're saying it's what you learn and you cognitively experience positively that determines the direction of your behavior, and it determines your willingness to change your behavior as you learn more and more. Now, consistent then with this kind of reinforcement, Roeder posits that the home is the first stage of personality development, and then that's followed closely by the school. And he particularly emphasizes the importance of the school, since so many reinforcers are actually learned through your peer interactions. And in terms of school, Roeder also posited that if parents are not active, and if parents are not good models while you're at home, children will not have learned the behaviors they actually need when they go to school. So he's saying if children are neglected, that might be one reason they didn't learn behaviors. or if the parents don't teach the children appropriate behaviors, then the child arrives in school unprepared for that environment. And if you think back to if you remember first grade or kindergarten or whatever, your early days in school, there are always a couple of kids like this that nobody wants to be with, that everybody shuns because the kid has inappropriate behavior. They disrupt the class. They won't cooperate in things that the class is trying to do. They make noises. They just do all kinds of things that kind of get everybody upset. This is tremendously important because that means that from the earliest time, from the time that kids are interacting with their peers, they're getting all negative reinforcements, or essentially all negative reinforcements. And one of the assumptions we make is this is not all that unlike home. That is, they're not getting a lot of positive reinforcements at home. So what occurs in the life of this child, and it's very sad, but the child is probably not going to do very well in school. And we find that lots of these kids don't do well in school. It has absolutely nothing to do with IQ. It has everything to do with one's ability to be part of a social scene. And Roeder, of course, observed this as any practicing psychologist would that saw any children, is so often when you give an IQ test, it's stunning that this child is this bright, and at the same time, the child is this unsuccessful. So instead of focusing on, let's find special education for this child, which would be useless, kids probably as bright, in many cases, kids as bright as most of the people in the class, maybe even brighter. One has to begin to examine what has happened in this child's life that they can't adjust in a classroom where actually they have all the abilities that are necessary to make such an adjustment. So this concept is terribly important in Roeder, and again, it's a real insight for us as we try to understand, how actually do we develop. And it's also important to keep in mind that, this is one of the first theories that's saying how important peers really are for you. Okay, in our next class, we're going to go on and we're going to elaborate on some of this, but we'll take a break for now.